Hello, class 7 students. How are you all? So today, Prerna ma'am is going to teach you chapter number 13 from your textbook. All right. And this chapter, it is on page number 120. So let us start reading this chapter. So chapter number 13, which is by the name Directive Principles of State Policy. And what are the key points or what are the main topics that we are going to cover in this chapter is first is welfare state features. And of course, we're going to also understand the meaning of directive principles of state policy. Then principles promoting economic equality, general principles and Gandhian principles. And then we are going to also understand the difference between fundamental rights and directive principles of state policy. All right. So to begin with, first we are going to understand the meaning of directive principles of state policy. Now, what we need to understand is that directive principles of state policy are also a part of the Indian Constitution, about which we have studied in chapter number 11, and an important aspect of the Indian Constitution, that is the fundamental rights and the fundamental duties, we studied in chapter number 12. So today we are going to understand what exactly are directive principles of state policy. Okay. So what is the meaning? So these are basically directions or instructions which are laid down by the Constitution of India for the legislature and the executive. So basically kind of instructions which are given to the two organs of the government. You remember we studied about these, legislature and executive. So basically to these two organs of the government, the instructions are given in the form of directive principles of state policy. They are non-justiciable. That is, if these are not obeyed, the Supreme Court or the High Court, they cannot take any action and no remedy can be provided to the aggrieved party. That is the party which is suffered. So you remember in fundamental rights, if your rights are violated, you can approach the courts. If directive principles of state policy are not really followed, there's no point in approaching the court because they're not really enforceable. But even the directive principles of state policy, they aim at achieving ideals of justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity in order to establish a welfare state. Now, you might be wondering that, ma'am, if there is no enforcement by the law, how can justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity be achieved, or how can a welfare state be established? Because these instructions tell that how can you establish justice, liberty, equality, and basically build a welfare state. So these, as we've read, the very first point, the instructions. Okay, so by providing instructions also, we can guide the government that how they are supposed to make laws. Then these are specified in part 4 of the Constitution from Article 36 to 51. And the framers of the Constitution borrowed this concept from the Irish Constitution. If you remember in the chapter when we said about the making of the Indian Constitution, we discussed, or I told you, that the Indian Constitution, the features of the Indian Constitution have been taken from various other constitutions of the world. So American Bill of Rights influenced fundamental rights and duties. So the Irish Constitution, it influenced the, from there, the concept of directive principles of state policy has been borrowed. And of course, whether it's the fundamental rights or the duties or the directive principles of state policies, these have been modified in such a way that the needs of the Indian citizens are fulfilled. All right. Now we talk about the classification. So we started that there are 6 fundamental rights, correct, and a set of fundamental duties. Similarly, the directive principles of state policy are also classified under various headings. What are these? Let's find that out. Okay, so now we come to the classification. So they are classified under the following heads. First is the Gandhian principle, of course, inspired by Mahatma Gandhi. The sale of intoxicating drinks and drugs to be prohibited. So it's an instruction which is given to the states. Okay. So we know that Mahatma Gandhi was completely against liquor. Then promotional of the educational and economic interest of the weaker section. So like Mahatma Gandhi always spoke about supporting the lower caste people whom he called as the Harijans. Then organization of village panchayats. Why? To strengthen the local government. So see how these points can actually lead to the establishment of the welfare state. Then to organize agriculture and animal husbandry on modern lines, that is providing modern techniques of irrigation of animal husbandry, prohibition of slaughter of milch cows, then promotion of cottage industries in the rural areas. So we also know that how Mahatma Gandhi supported the indigenous or the the local goods, correct? Then to ensure free and compulsory primary education up to the age of 14. So this is about the Gandhian principle. Now we talk about the scholastic principles. So fair distribution of wealth to reduce the gap between the rich and the poor. Like we studied, right to equality, right to economic equality. So rich is becoming richer and poor is becoming poorer. That should not happen. Then provision for adequate means of livelihood. Protection from exploitation of children, women, and youth. So, while we are reading these directive principles of state policy under various heads, we see that they have a close relationship with the fundamental rights as well. Then equal pay for equal work. You remember in the previous class, I told you about this for both men and women. Participation of workers in the management of their respective industries. Then the third heading is principles protecting the environment, to protect the forest and the wildlife of the country, natural resources. Remember, we studied this in fundamental duties as well, and to safeguard and improve the natural environment. Then the fourth is principles related to the protection of monuments and objects of national importance related to fundamental duty. Protection of historical structures, object of artistic interest, and monuments from destruction, disposal, export, damage, disfigurement, etc. So you might have seen that sometimes our national monuments are actually deteriorated, in a deteriorated condition. Why? Because people have engraved something or the other, have shown their artistic skills on these monuments. That should not be done. Then principles relating to law, justice, and administration. So separation of judiciary from the executive. Existence of a uniform civil code throughout the country. Equality before law. To provide free legal aid to the poor and needy. Then international principles to foster respect for international laws and treaties. Promote international peace and security. And then to maintain just relations with other nations, that is good, harmonious, and which are not formed of any prejudice. So such kind of relations. Now we talk of the implementation of directive principles of state policy. How does that happen? So we know that they cannot be enforced by the court as they do not have any legal sanction. At the time of drafting of the Constitution of India, these principles were set as guidelines to be incorporated by the government as and when it is considered feasible. The government of India constantly strives to incorporate these principles to various schemes and programs. Because what is the aim? The aim is to establish a welfare state. So there are a lot of schemes that are given by the government, a lot of programs that the government initiates so that these directive principles are also used and the main objective of welfare state is also met. Now, having studied about all these, about the directive principles of state policy, we need to understand that there is some difference between fundamental rights and the directive principles of state policy. What are these? So, fundamental rights, even the government cannot take away or abridge these rights. Directive principles are merely instructions to the government. Then, most importantly, fundamental rights are enforceable by the law. If your law is violated, you can approach the court. But directive principles are not enforceable in any court. Third, the government cannot take policy decisions on these rights. So related to policy, the government cannot take any decisions when it comes to fundamental rights. But when we talk about directive principles of state policy, what happens? The government has power to make policy decisions on these principles. Why? Because I just told you that what is happening? The aim is to establish a welfare state. Now, because that is the aim, to establish a welfare state, so the government has the right to decide that what policy is best suited related to the area. Correct? Then these rights, the fundamental rights, they strengthen the economy and mainly the political democracy. Directive principles, the implementation of these principles ensures social and economic democracy. So fundamental rights are for political democracy. Directive principles are for social and economic democracy. Fundamental rights are natural rights, and directive principles, they lead to protect human rights. Now we talk about welfare state. So what is a welfare state? It is a state which takes up the responsibilities to provide proper education, health, housing, and social security to its citizens. So basically a state, a country which aims and also makes certain plans and considers it as to be the responsibility to provide basic public facilities, health, sanitation, education, medical facilities. So that is considered as a welfare state wherein the basic public facilities are provided to the people. The concept of welfare state goes beyond the maintenance of law and order. The state looks into the overall well-being of its subjects, and the government, through various policies and programs, aims to establish a welfare state. Now, there have been certain schemes to establish the welfare state. What are these? So basically, we talk about the scheme of Manrega, wherein 100 days of employment was provided to the unemployed. 100 days of guarantee was provided to the unemployed youth. Correct? Now, and of course, the economic security of the people is also looked into. So a lot of policies, a lot of schemes the government has provided to reach to the objective of welfare state, like the policy related to Kisan credit card, wherein the Kisans were given a kind of a credit card or are offered loans at a lower rate of interest. The Grameen banks, all these are the kind of schemes for establishing a welfare state. Now, a small comparison of the welfare activities in the past and the present. So if we recall some of the events that took place in the past and some of the measures initiated by the rulers of ancient and medieval India, we understand that various welfare schemes have been implemented in the past, So for example, the elaborate underground drainage system, which was built by the Harappans, correct? Then the way, the kingdom was divided into provinces, districts, grams. Why was it done? So that there is effective administration, correct? Then it says that in Rock Edict 6, Ashoka declared that all men were his children. So he said that, a ruler is like he's like a father. So he has this responsibility to take care of his subjects, just like a father takes care and takes the responsibility of his children. He planted trees along the roads and started charitable hospitals for the people. And during the Sultanate period, the Tughlaq ruler, you remember he built up the facility for postal activities, and then rest houses, all these for the travelers. And then of course how taxes were also looked into. Talking about the present scenario, the government of India through various schemes and policies has been trying to work for the welfare of the people. So towards decentralized system of government, that is, there are 3 levels of government. Now, effective administration is ensured. The government of India has implemented a number of schemes. National Food Security Act 2013, Land Acquisition Act 2013, Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana 2014, and it has also provided reservation for jobs and in education industry for the underprivileged section, or for the people who are considered belonging to the lower caste. So this is all about directive principles of state policies. Now, I hope all of you have understood this. And what are you going to do? You're going to read the chapter again, watch the video, make notes, and then answer the questions on your own. Till then, keep learning and keep growing. Bye-bye, my dear students.